There are multiple ways to keep in touch with the Wolf Connection podcast. Through our Instagram handle, the Wolf Connection Pod. And for comments and questions, send us an email to podcast@wolfconnection.org with your comments, questions, and guest ideas for Stephen and myself. You may hear your question answered on an upcoming podcast. Thank you for your support, and howls to you all. Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Kalfa. Let's talk about some wolves. Traveling once again. So I've been very lucky and blessed to have another participant who we've had on the podcast before, but Bridget Borg from Denali. I did miss her panel, full disclosure, so she can needle me as much as she wants for the next, 20, 30 minutes, however long we're here. First of all, how is it for you just to be here? This is your first time, right? Or were you at the last one?
I was at the last one. Yeah, I was there in 2018, and that was a great experience. And I met a lot of people and was able to create a lot of actually great collaborations that came out of that meeting.
Yeah. And then this one, so you just did your panel, which was about the entirety of your research through Denali. And I know you had family come in. What was that like? Because you were talking about that on the way up to do this. How was that just to have them here and be present for that?
Yeah. Well, this was my plenary. Tomorrow's the panel. So
thank you.
Anyways,
see, she's going to correct me multiple times.
You.
It's fine.
He wouldn't know because he wasn't there, so it's okay. Anyways, so it was a really great opportunity. I mean, first of all, just to share the history of research in Denali and Alaska with people. And as you mentioned, my family came because they are from Minnesota and they're just really sweet. And so that was an extra added moment of like genuine kind of heartwarmingness of the whole thing. But having the opportunity to come to a conference like this, a lot of people's, I think, attention and knowledge base really comes from wolves in the lower 48 and some of the issues, obviously, that they're facing probably, in their locality or maybe something that's a little bit more in people's, realm, like Yellowstone.
In their view, yeah.
In their view, right? So coming here and being able to maybe put Alaska in their view and Alaskan wolves in their view was kind of my goal. And also talking about, like, we have this really cool long history and trajectory of kind of the evolution of policy in the National Park Service and how they were going to treat predators that happened and really, like, all kind of coalesced in Mount McKinley National Park, which was the original name for Denali National Park.
Yeah.
And so it played a really big role in that history. And so I think letting people know about that role and the importance of it was kind of fun. Yeah, good to like pull that back to people's forefront.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. Like when I just spoke with Bridget, Joey, and Kristen, it just seems like a lot of the stuff that was maybe out of focus or not really in everybody's right in the front center. So like Mexican gray wolves, red wolves, and the genealogy, the gene stuff that's happening there, the ghost alleles. And it's making it, I don't want to say cool, but it's at the forefront now. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, are you experiencing that at all at this conference? Maybe that, Denali and the stuff from Alaska is starting to become a little bit more in the forefront, or is it still just sort of networking and figuring that out?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think for me, it's always at the forefront because
of course,
that is my job. That is my world. So for me, a conference like this brings those other things, like getting to hear from somebody about the Colorado wolf reintroduction and, what's going on with Mexican gray wolves. Like having that all synthesized by these people who it is their world, that is great because it broadens that perspective for me and like brings everything together. So, I was just hope that I was able to do that for other people regarding like Denali wolves specifically, but kind of just thinking about wolves in Alaska as well. Yeah.
Just give everybody a brief, I guess, synopsis of what were you trying to get across in your talk and trying to convey to the rest of the people that were here, because you're talking about, again, over 400 individuals from all over the country, all over the world. What was your aim really in that talk?
Yeah. So John, you're trying to get me to like synopsize the whole thing because you missed it, right?
Yes,
like,
that's exactly
like
it.
I missed it.
Yeah.
So can you just redo it?
Can you just,
please?
yeah, exactly.
Just give me the elevator version. Oh gosh. Okay. I mean, it was tough to do in 30 minutes. Like I covered almost like 100 years of history. Like I went back to 1917 when the park was first created, and you know how McKinley National Park was a relatively new park. So there's this like, you know, pretty young agency, the National Park Service, that's dealing with a park that has a full complement of its predators still there, right?
Yeah.
So Denali National, or what was then McKinley National Park, was created to protect primarily the species of Dall sheep. They're like an iconic white sheep that inhabit, you know, Western Canada and Alaskan like alpine rugged terrain. And so it was only a decade after the establishment of the park that the sheep population began to decline. And so even though the Park Service was having some of these, was I think kind of at the forefront of realizing the importance of predators and maybe allowing parks to be these reservoirs where we could leave things unmolested, even though despite what was going on. Yeah, right. And, you know, a key kind of theme through my talk was Joseph Grinnell's idea of living laboratories. The national parks could be living laboratories where we protect and conserve wild lands and wildlife as it was, and you know the native fauna retain their primitive relationship to each other. Yeah, so this idea, you know, was kind of a new idea. The Park Service was like thought that maybe they should be this living laboratory, but there was so much, you know, public and like special interest pressure to control wolves, to kill wolves because the sheep population declined. And so the Park Service really, you know, had a lot of growing pains, I think, with coming to terms with how they were going to deal with this. So they did kill wolves for a period of time, and then they stopped, and then they killed wolves again. And then they actually hired a biologist, Adolf Murray, to come and study the system. And so Adolf's studies were really formative in understanding both like wild wolf packs. Like there wasn't much opportunity before for people to observe, I guess coming from the Western culture perspective,
Right.
for people to observe and comment and document like wild wolf behavior. So he really contributed a lot to that early understanding of wolf dynamics, and also, you know, said wolves obviously can prey on these sheep, but there was some pretty dramatic winter conditions that led to increased vulnerability of the sheep.
Right.
And so even following that, you know, there was still a lot of pressure. Like this was kind of contributing to the people's understanding of the role of predation and prey. But, you know, there was still a lot of desire and public pressure, and even Murray himself. And, you know, I have a quote from my plenary, which
if I would have went to, I would have heard.
Yeah, you would have heard. Which, you know, even Adolf Murray, this, you know, kind of iconic conservationist, I think, you know, says like, I think we should do wolf control. Like, are we not just bringing too much opposition to the wolf and too much, you know, bad press basically to the wolf? Maybe some control in this instance is the best way to help the wolf. And wolf control did continue in the park for over 20 years. It wasn't until the 1950s when they stopped doing any active wolf control. And so that was kind of part of a changing tide of both federal wolf control started happening outside of the boundaries, so that kind of reduced pressure. And I think there was a growing awareness of the importance of this area. You know, a lot of scientific organizations were saying, hey, this is maybe the one place left on the continent where we can provide a sanctuary for wolves.
Yeah, a living, breathing sanctuary. I mean, it's really fascinating. I mean, I know when Steve and I were talking to you before, the backyard that you have is so incredibly fascinating, and there's just so much to do. And it's, does it feel sort of recluse a little bit? I mean, I don't know if we talked about that in our talk before, but like, it's not, Yellowstone has this path to get in. I know there's a path to get into to Denali, but it almost seems Denali is sort of this treasure that, only certain people can get to in certain points of the year. I mean, do you feel that at all with where it is?
Ooh, yeah, that's kind of a good question when you start to think about like accessibility to
Yeah, right.
the world and everything. So I think in terms of like physical accessibility, it does obviously take a greater effort, I guess, to get to Alaska, first of all, for most people who don't live there. And then, there's 6 million acres of the park. We have one 92-mile long road that transects, through the park. And visitation is a regulated system. So people are traveling by buses. And so that is, there are a number of steps that people need to take to access this place. But I think that also, not that it's kind of reclusive, but those factors help maintain some of the wilderness aspects of it. It's just the nature of where it is,
Yeah.
That's what we're maintaining, is an area that is remote and wild, and that it's not that easy to access necessarily.
And you are a steward of that place. I mean, and that's the work that you do. I mean, is there, and you said something just before too about talking about the sheep population. And I know we were both at the early discussion where they were talking about a lot of management, wolf management, which, I think was, we had a little bit, we were just talking on the way up here about how, they started the conference off like that, and we're like, okay. And you did bring up a good point, to have both sides of the equation in here, because if it's all one-sided, like you say, if it's all pro-wolf, or it's not even about being pro-wolf or anti-wolf. I think it's just being about the measures that have to be taken in some of these other places. Do you find that as a scientist that's good, because you want to have that give and take? Otherwise, is it going to be believable when anybody does research?
Yeah. I think that what all those talks earlier today, which talked about, wolf control. So like in a lot of places, there's still active lethal control of wolves. And when that happens, I think common to all of them is that they try to preface it with explaining that in some ways it's a question of I guess dissecting the science from the values.
Right.
So there's like science about like what happens when we kill wolves, and how ungulates respond to it, and that can get distorted because of people's values. And so I do think it was good in a way to set up that framework for people, here's the science, and take that or leave that, but understand that you're filtering it through a lens of your values. So and I think they even had like a really good kind of question of like, is it ethical to kill wolves if we're trying to keep, caribou herds from going extinct?
Yeah.
Like a few wolves, kind of at the cost of like increasing caribou numbers, is that worth it? That those are like ethics questions and values questions that get really sticky for people. But I think it was good to bring to people's forefront that like there is science, there are reasons, management goals, or like population maintenance goals,
Right,
that are there too for species other than wolves.
And it's not simple, as we all know.
Yeah.
I mean, the ecosystem, everything that we, that you're a part of, that many of the people here are a part of, is that you're right, it's not just one predator. It's you have to figure out all these other, and there's a lot of cultural and social aspects that come into this. So it's not so cut and dry. It can't be. And it's like you said, it's a good, I think you're right. It really sort of set the tone, and it was like, okay, we're going to see how this goes. But it's good to hear. I think it's to have it out there, so at least it's there, and it's not just we're seeing this research and, people might not read it all the time. And I think if you get 400 people who actually can listen to it and see it, and then they can take it back and say, hey, this is what other places are doing or they have to do for X, Y, and Z reason. It's good to have that. Otherwise, in the public sphere, you're just talking about one side or the other.
Right.
It's not going to work,
Yeah. Yeah. And science gets distorted, I think, a lot in order to kind of match what people's, how they want things to look on one side or the other.
Yeah.
So I think, trying to, I think that's an important thing. And I think it's kind of a framework, it's good for something like this to open up to people. Like if they're not expanding, if we're not expanding our minds, like
what are we doing?
A meeting of minds, like what are we doing? So, but I think that really important, like dissection of like, here's what the science says, here's what your values are. And like being clear, like, oh, these are my values. So like, I hear that science, but my values still say this, you know, like that's something that I think is really hard for people to be self-aware about, but is also really important and kind of a good opportunity with venues like this.
Yeah. And if you want to hit middle ground, you're not going to hit it by just by doing
just,
one side or the other.
Yeah, by just standing on your values and just, well, I mean, you can just stand on your values. You can just stand on your values, but at the same time, if you're arguing about the same piece of science and one side says it says this and one side says it says this, it's like, well, it just says, X. And my perspective on that is that Y,
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
For you personally, was there any, and I know we're only in the first full official day, was there any talk or any person, any group of people that you were itching to meet, to talk with, to correspond with? Was there anyone that you had, high hopes of meeting and talking with?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, I mean, I honestly, there were probably some people I didn't know how much I would have in common with. So then once I start talking with them, I was like, oh, yes, I actually did need to have this conversation. I needed to talk to you. Yeah. So sometimes that's a little unexpected to me. So yeah, it's hard to, like, I can't just pick out one. I feel like there are so many people that I've met that I can't pick,
Yeah, even like your top, 2, 3, like who just, throw some names. Who do you, there's 440 people. Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm looking forward to meeting the other Bridget.
Yes.
I know. We're talking about that.
We've had back-to-back Bridgets.
Yeah, you were just chatting with Bridget von Holt, who I read some of her research, and I was like, and someone else in the literature named Bridget. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
I haven't found her yet, though.
Yeah. You can find Bridget. I can introduce the Bridget. I can make the Bridget connection happen.
You can make up for not attending my plenary.
I can at the very least, I can have you meet Bridget von Holt. I'm not going to live this down. I know it. I'm going to get random emails from Bridget Borg and be like, thanks for not attending. I mean, what's it like? What are some of the differences as how do you take in information as opposed to speaking the information? So when you're in there and you're listening, you're taking in, what's your process? I mean, obviously everybody does it differently and there's a different faction, but what are you looking to gain out of it when you go to a certain talk or you go to, a certain panel and things like that? Or
yeah, I mean, I like to sit there and sometimes just take notes. Like even if it's something I know something about, like I feel like taking notes it keeps me engaged and kind of like picking out the salient points that I want to think about and writing down, articles, like thinking of my to read list is really engaging too, because there's ways in which you can get kind of siloed in your one area. So it's nice to think about ways to expand, even though, I mean, you're still siloed in the wolf arena, but ways to expand in that is really great. And yeah, I mean, I think in my mind, I'm always thinking, not always, but I do think about the parallels between my work and other people's work and, thinking about what they do that I could incorporate or, innovations that might be worth trying. and opportunities for collaboration. Like I really like to emphasize, opportunities for collaboration and try to bring that into Denali a little bit more, because I think it both brings Denali into other people's worlds.
Yeah.
But also, helps me make, Denali's research and that legacy of it more relevant and broad. So those are all things I'm thinking about.
Yeah. And it's like you say, it's very cool to see everybody just like being able to meld into different places. And I hate to use the word click, but you just get to see how people react, where they go, oh, I've read your research and I haven't seen you physically, but I know everything about you, or I know, or I've, like you and I, you, Bridget, the other Bridget, Kiracast, like all these people that I've met over Zoom. But then when you finally in person, it's such a different dynamic, because you're like, oh, these people are actually real. And not that everybody wasn't real before, but you just have this different, motivation to want to learn more, because it's personal. It's one-on-one, and you can really get to the root of what they're doing and why they do it.
Yeah, I feel like I learn a lot too from if you've read someone's paper that they've authored, say you read this paper and you get a sense of the work they've done, but then seeing the person and then talking to them about that same thing, you can get a whole nother perspective on that work that you just can't get in another way. And that can be a lot more sticky, I think, for me, like in learning about that person or learning about that research, just having that personal connection. So.
Yeah, 100%. So what are you looking forward to? What are you trying to get out of this before you head back to Denali? Like you said, you're trying to get more exposure for Denali, you're trying to get, collaboration. What's the one thing that you think you're going to be able to take from the symposium that you think is going to have an immediate impact for you when you head back? I know it's only the first day.
Yeah,
but
right.
So
I know.
it's like there's another couple of days.
One
but
thing I'm going to take home.
I
feel like there's a lot. I feel like in one, I guess what I would say is that in like day-to-day work, sometimes you just get really focused on, doing the next thing, the next task, the next emergency. And I think that almost the perspective from this, like just taking a deep breath and a break from being on my computer and doing all of that and coming back with a little bit of a different perspective on things, is probably one thing I want to take away from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think this gives you, if you needed it, do you think this gives you a little bit more of a jolt of like, ooh, like I'm doing really, really cool stuff? I don't think anybody gets, and who knows, I don't know about the work that everybody else does, but sometimes people get, in the mundane and things, you doing day to day. Is this sort of did it give you a little bit of a jolt when you did, your, is it plenary? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, it was plenary.
Plenary, yeah. When you did, like, when you're prepping for it, and please, I didn't intend, I don't know what's going on. Like, you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? Is there a jolt of like a re-energizing of, what you're doing, of like, oh yeah, this is the reason I got into what I was doing.
Yeah, and maybe even just like preparing for something like this too. I was talking with a few other people at the poster session before this, where when you are preparing a talk for an audience, sometimes that is also the time where you've been in the nitty gritty of what you're doing. And it's a time to like take that step back and be like, okay, what does this mean to other people? Or how do I make this important to other people?
Right.
And how do I synthesize? Like, they don't need my like statistical rabbit hole that I just went down. Like, nobody needs to actually know that probably.
Yeah.
So like, how do I draw back from that? And how do I give the big picture? What does this mean? And so I feel like that's a really good thing for that kind of comes before. And then, coming back with a little bit of renewed energy because you've taken that big broad step and you've put it in place for yourself. Like, this is what I'm doing. And coming back maybe gives a new perspective on what you need to do in the day-to-day too. They
Yeah.
last for at least a little while.
Yeah.
yeah.
Until you're like,
Until you're
"Man."
like, oh my gosh, I just need to do all the things.
Yeah, I can hear that.
Yeah.
I hear that 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, this is great. And again, thank you so much for coming back on with me and sharing most of your discussion.
Giving you the redo.
Giving me the redo of that. But this is great. Bridget Borg, thank you so much. This is so cool. And it's great. I'm glad we were able to do this in person and do this again. So,
Likewise.
Yeah, awesome.
Thanks.
House to everybody out there, and we'll be back with more. Bye, everybody. Looking to support Wolf Connection or sponsor one of the wolves in our pack? Just go to wolfconnection.org, click on the Donate tab, and find out more information.